Witness by Whitaker Chambers, the true story of a spy who came in from the cold. So, this book, even though it may not be overly popular today, was nonetheless one of the most significant and influential works of memoir of the 20th century, it being the story of the man who instigated the Alger Hiss trial. Now, if you are unfamiliar with the Alger Hiss trial, if you don't know about that particular bit of legal history, the trial of Alger Hiss was one of the major court cases in America in the 20th century. It was called, I believe, or at the very least could be called, the trial of the century. Alger Hiss was a high ranking government official in the Roosevelt administration who had a pretty significant hand in geopolitics at the time. I believe he was involved actually with the establishment of the United Nations, and also he had a pretty considerable role at the Yalta Conference, actually. But one day, a man named Whitaker Chambers came forward and accused Alger Hiss of being a communist spy for the Soviet Union. That was a pretty big claim. It may go without saying. He was kind of punching the heavy bag, so to speak. Alger Hiss vehemently denied the charge and sued Whitaker Chambers for libel. However, Chambers was able to produce some pretty damning receipts, which proved that Alger Hiss was lying. Hiss was convicted of perjury and ultimately imprisoned. The trial of Alger Hiss, like I said, was one of the major legal events of the mid 20th century. It kind of blew the lid off, you might say, of kind of the notion of communist infiltration of the American government. It all kind of ties in with McCarthyism and kind of the Red Scare of the time, which, if this book proves anything, it proves that that was not unwarranted in the slightest, regardless of whatever revisionism would have you believe. But yeah, so this book is fascinating. It is also quite long. It is over 700 pages long, and it covers much more than just the accusations and trial of Alger Hiss. It is basically the full biography of Whitaker Chambers up to that point. And it is, like I said, a very fascinating work, and also one of great power, actually. And as per usual, I'm going to tell you all about it. So the story of Whitaker Chambers is an interesting one. He grew up in the early 20th century in a rather dysfunctional household, which kind of teetered on the brink of poverty. Kind of strained relations between his parents. Again, some kind of strained finances as well. His brother ultimately ended up taking his own life, tragically. And then with the outbreak and aftermath of World War I, Mr. Chambers came to believe that the crisis of history was at hand, that the old ways were dying, and that something new was about to be born in the world. So he was eventually attracted to the writings of Marx and Lenin, and ultimately became a member of the Communist Party in America. And ultimately, after that, became a member of the Communist Underground, where he worked as an espionage agent, that is, a spy for the Soviet Union here in America. It is at that point that he became acquainted with and worked alongside Alger Hiss in the Soviet underground here in the USA. But eventually, Chambers became disillusioned with communism due to the total amorality of its functionaries, and also with the myriad atrocities being committed in the Soviet Union. And so he eventually broke with the Communist Party and split. And he eventually became a writer at Time, actually, Time magazine. But eventually, after a crisis of conscience, he decided to come forward and expose his one-time accomplice, Alger Hiss, in order to try to save America, or what was left of America, from the threat posed by communism and its infiltration of and manipulation of America's government. So that is the broad strokes of the story. It's just one man's life, one man's rather remarkable life, and his achievements, both good and ill. So that is the story. Let's talk about the writing of it. Whitaker Chambers could write. This is a remarkably well written memoir. As I said, Chambers eventually became a writer, actually an editor, even at Time magazine. So of course he had to have some skill with the pen, I suppose you could say, and he did, because again the writing in this is quite good, quite eloquent at times, and it's really just a kind of a treat to read, because not only was the story fascinating, but its execution was uh, eloquent enough that it serves the story quite well. So the writing in Witness is good. The characters now, there are a lot of characters in this, but of course the main one is Chambers himself, and he is a fascinating figure. He is kind of a fatalist in many regards. There's kind of just this overriding aura of pessimism throughout his story, where even when he goes turncoat on the commies and decides to turn state's witness against Alger Hiss, he's kind of just like, am I doing the right thing? Is it even possible for me to do the right thing? Is any of this going to pan out for good in the end at all? He was kind of not the cheeriest individual, and of course that's probably due to his background of borderline poverty and familial dysfunction and family tragedy as well. Not the peachiest life, and I suppose that probably had a certain impact on the formation of his character, which was kind of dour. But at it, underneath it all, at heart, Chambers ultimately had convictions. His initial convictions were that communism was going to be the salvation of the modern world, that it was going to create that utopia and resolve the conflicts in the world at the time, and it was going to solve the crisis of history which he believed the world was undergoing. But ultimately, like I said, he became disillusioned with communism because of just how amoral its agents were, and also just the myriad atrocities which its agents committed around the world. And ultimately, he converted like religiously to the Society of Friends, that is the Quakers. This book is not just the story of his life in the physical sense. It is also the story of his life in a spiritual sense. It is quite literally a spiritual autobiography, as he eventually turned from a very radical system of what you might call political theology towards genuine theology, turning from faith in man to faith in the divine. And it is a very moving experience, I would say. And again, he is a man of very deep convictions, because he put it all on the line to come forward to do this. Like I said, he was punching the heavy bag. He was accusing a man with a spotless record in the very upper echelons of the government of major treason. And he, again, just put it all on the line. He put everything at stake. He pushed all the chips forward, and it cost him, because his reputation was tarnished because of this. Because the guilt of Alger Hiss was hotly debated. Actually, it is still hotly debated, because Alger Hiss maintained his innocence to the day he died. And that's kind of why Chambers wrote this, because he needed to kind of explain himself more, because it was so kind of tumultuous for him personally, the outcome of things. But of course, later declassified Soviet documents pretty much cemented the fact that Alger Hiss very likely was 100% a Soviet agent. So Chambers was ultimately vindicated, I think, even though his actions took their toll upon him. But this book is, as I said, one of the most significant and influential works of memoir of the 20th century. Everybody may remember Ronald Reagan now as being kind of the crown jewel of the GOP in the latter half of the 20th century. But what a lot of people may not be aware of is that he was at one point a New Deal Democrat. But this book, the story of Whitaker Chambers, is what caused him to cross party lines and become a Republican, because it was very clear that the Roosevelt administration had some very subversive and un-American elements at play in it, but also that whole push in that direction was a push in a direction that uh, America probably should not have gone in. Anyway, so Ronald Reagan can credit his conversion from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party largely to this book. I believe he did. But beyond that, this book proves that, as I said, the Red Scare in America in the 1950s, the McCarthy era, which nowadays is hand waved away as merely an example of conservative hysteria, was in fact anything but. There were subversive communist agents in the U.S. government which were working to undermine that government and advance the cause of a hostile foreign power. And this book proves that. Now, the ultimate outcome of such investigations perhaps were inconclusive and may not have led to the outcomes which they were intended to. But nonetheless, this book does prove that there was very legitimate cause for concern regarding that. And also, it is a real testament to the necessity of firm convictions in our lives whenever we face evil, because that is what Whitaker Chambers ultimately came to realize, is that this radical force which he was once behind is actually pretty destructive. And so he again switched teams and testified against it. But again, to refer to Ronald Reagan, in his speech before the American Association of Evangelicals, I believe, he made his now famous Evil Empire speech, where he declared that the Soviet Union was an evil empire, and that the Cold War, the conflict between the U.S. and the USSR, was not merely a conflict of economics and ideology, but was in fact nothing less than an example of the eternal war between good and evil. Now, many people may be, inclined to dismiss that as incredibly hyperbolic and meant to just kind of, stir up furor on the part of the American conservatives to gain support behind his administration. But I think this book actually lends quite a bit of credence to that claim. The Soviet Union was a nation which was steeped in atrocity and brutality from its very inception. And even though by the time of perestroika and such, things had calmed down and people weren't being gunned down in the streets or shipped off to Siberia, nonetheless, the legacy of human rights violations remained, and the citizens of the Soviet Union never did have the same rights as the citizens of America. It really was a conflict between freedom and a very dangerous and subversive ideology which seeks to strip the individual of their freedom and their rights. And Reagan pointed that out, and this book kind of backs that up because it shows just how ruthless these people actually were. But it also still has relevance today, to the world of today, I think, because even though the Soviet Union collapsed, that doesn't really mean anything. Francis Fukuyama was wrong whenever he declared the collapse of the Soviet Union to be the end of history. That was not the end of history. That was not the end of the war. That was merely the end of one battle. And of course, communism didn't disappear. It just morphed into new forms such as CRT and the like. So the battle rages on still today. And this book still has the power, I think, to, as the Gipper himself said, as is quoted on the back here, to ennoble and inspire. Because it is the story of one man who put it all on the line and took a stand for what he believed was right, even to his detriment. And I think that it is an inspiring story which many can take great lessons from, I think. And once again, it is just one of the greatest works of memoir of the 20th century. You know, there are certain works of memoir, such as the Confessions of St. Augustine, T.E. Lawrence's Seven Pillars of Wisdom, the autobiography of Malcolm X. There are certain works of memoir which are regarded as just all-time classics, and this is absolutely one of them. It may have waned in popularity since its publication, since the 1950s, but nonetheless, it is an exquisitely written work and one of great power and profundity, I think, and it is still quite valuable in my estimations. So, Witness by Whitaker Chambers. Have you read Witness? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said about it here today. And if you haven't read Witness, I could definitely recommend this if you're interested in like the Cold War, because this is like a key text of the Cold War. It really is. And if you're interested in the Cold War or kind of the milieu of the 1950s, you know, the McCarthy era and stuff like that, I would say definitely pick this up. And also, if you're interested in the history of Richard Nixon, pick this up. If on the off chance there are any fans of Richard Nixon out there, or anybody who is interested in his accession to power, because he was on the House Un-American Activities Committee, which Whitaker Chambers testified to. He was actually the one more than any other who was willing to give Chambers credence and actually push the charges against Hiss. And that whole event was kind of the catapult which launched him to the forefront of American politics. So Tricky Dick, he was good for something, I guess, at least. But as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.